My name is Lisa Dulside, and I'm with the Weasel Head Glenmore Park Preservation Society, obviously. And we have just wrapped up, well, not just, but we had our 7-year Southwest Calgary Ring Road Impact Study. And so this is just sort of a summary of that, but with a highlight of what our recommendations are coming from it. So some of you were here last year and you saw a more in-depth presentation about the study itself, but yeah, we'll get going. So just so that you're aware, it's not, oh, I forgot to note there we go. To thank our sponsors, most important part. So we're really grateful to the Land Stewardship Centre, Alberta Eco Trust, and the Calgary Foundation for allowing this project to happen. And it's not something that we were attempting to take a comprehensive survey of the ecosystem components. It was actually just looking at the environmental impact assessment for the road, what their major predictions were, how they classified them. We're assessing that. So it's just on specific environmental indicators. So we looked at terrestrial components and aquatic components. In the terrestrial side, we were surveying noise, the breeding bird population, vegetation, and with the help of Mastaki Institute, the mammal movement. With the aquatic components, water quality, aquatic invertebrate presence, and amphibians. Not included in the study, but something that happened in the middle of the study in 2020 when the city of Calgary improved the Glenmore Dam, the water levels drastically raised, and that is included in our final report because it has a huge impact on the park. And so we do have some copies of the report on the back table there, but it's also available on our website if you go to the Ring Road page. The methodologies that we conducted are based on AMEX Environmental and Infrastructure's Environmental Impact Assessment, which I'll call the EIA from here forward. They did that in 2006 and they updated it in 2014. And then our methodologies for our amphibian survey were based on the Call of the Wetland by Mastaki. So we based these methodologies, the same survey points, because we wanted to be able to have that baseline data comparison. The EIA predicted minor negative long-term effects impacting the hydrological regime of wetlands and minor negative effects in terms of decreased wetland habitat. So that's just one example of one of their predictions, and we disagree with the outcome of it. So the construction started in late 2016, and more intense construction starting in 2017, and we started seeing the water levels in the beaver pond go down. And at first we weren't even really pointing fingers at the Ring Road. There could have been so many different things that happened, but in that assessment, they had it just as a minor impact. Although on October 31st of 2019, an enforcement order was delivered to KGL, who built the Ring Road for the province. And here's a quote. It's the company was issued approval to permanently disturb, infill 24 wetlands and dewatering of the wetlands on the lands. So between Highway 8 and Highway 22, it was actually 22 full wetlands that were destroyed completely for the Ring Road. 2 of those wetlands were partially saved. YYC Calgary, YYC Calgary came together and they put a stay on the construction, and they managed to save 2 of the wetlands, just part of 2 of the wetlands that actually are the 2 feeders directly into the beaver pond. I can't imagine how fast it would have gone if they hadn't have protected those little bits of wetlands. So we do think that there's been some major hydrological changes as a result of all of this. And we do question about removing wetlands, and we question what happens when you're swishing the groundwater system that feeds into them. So that's just sort of an example. And it wasn't just the beaver pond, it was also the Oxbow has the wet water left in it as well, where that floating bridge used to occur. There's lots of compounding factors into this though. We are in a multi-year drought. We have the absence of the beaver. The beavers have moved out of that wetland and they do maintain the water levels. But it is interesting that it would be so dry there when the rest of the park is inundated with immense amount of water. But we do have things to celebrate. So back in when the road was first designed and implemented, there was no wildlife corridor that was included in that. Susan Ryan was reading through the environmental impact assessment and saw that this tiny little opening for the river could result in the failure of the road if we had another flood like we had in 2013. And so we were really pushing the province to expand that bridge opening, and they did. So that was a good thing to celebrate. I'm not talking about all good things today, so we want to try to let you know some of the good things. The society also influenced the construction of the fencing there. So the wildlife fencing wouldn't have been included if it wasn't for our influence. And the intention of that fence is to direct the wildlife to that underpass. The road was actually first designed to be going right through the west side of the beaver pond. And so we did influence the province to change the design and also include this retaining wall to avoid filling in the wetland. Although when you look at it from an aerial, I kind of do question too if there was maybe an engineering failure or if it wasn't built the way, because it kind of acts, it's like it should have gone a little bit more this way. You can see where it comes down, point here. That's kind of like the funnel where a lot of spills happen. So we still celebrate that there's protection there, but things can maybe be done better in the future. During construction, we did lose the boreal chorus frog and the caddisflies in the wetlands because there was so many spills and they couldn't tolerate that to water contamination. But to celebrate, they have come back. So our surveys showed that they have returned. Wetlands do act as nature's kidneys, filtering and cleaning the water. So they've done their job and cleaned up a bit. And while we had a few birds that were absent during our breeding bird surveys in the construction period, those species have come back as well. Something else to celebrate is that as a result of all of their spills, they were ordered to have a third party come and monitor the water quality and also the quantity. And in their surveys, they did have alarming levels of zinc. They think it was probably because of one of the culverts, thank you for the word. But by 2023, those levels have come back to normal. Now, I bumped into the girls that were doing the water quality surveys in October, and they're pretty sure that it was their last survey at that time. So we'll have to see what the water quality looks like in their final report. In our main findings, there's a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of sediment and erosion mitigation failures. So they were meeting the policy standards with trying to hold that sediment back, but it just continued to fail. And that resulted in some statistically significant increases in conductivity, nitrate, phosphate over the study period. But with that third party water quality testing that was going on, they've also found that there was alarming levels of, notes here, chromium, nickel, selenium, arsenic, and uranium. So these are above what the allowable levels are, what's safe for us. This is our drinking water. And we're really hoping that when we see these final water quality reports that those are back down to normal levels. Noise levels we found really drastically increased as expected. So they were about 40 decibels before construction, up to 65 decibels after. To give you an idea of what that is, 40 decibels is like a library, and 65 decibels is like an electric mixer. And right now, current policies don't require any sort of mitigation measures to protect the natural area. So no inclusion of sound walls. We did also find that the fencing intended to direct the wildlife doesn't meet the requirements that they had set out in their design, build, finance, and operate agreement. The revegetation doesn't appear to be completed yet. So this is underneath in that wildlife corridor. But as a success note, the animals are using the corridor despite that. So we do have evidence of wildlife movement. Oh, missed my cougar picture. I've got to show that one off. Where did he go? Well, there's a cougar, a pair of cougars using that too. But we also sadly discovered that a lot of mitigation measures that were detailed in the contract between Alberta Transportation and the construction company weren't always implemented to specifications. For example, weed management was supposed to be done. That's the seed head of black henbane, and they haven't managed that very well. So those went to seed, they're all over the place. You can actually, as you're driving around the whole city of Calgary, you can see henbane all around, a big nice ring around the city of Calgary. They didn't build the fencing to the requirements, so wildlife can get under the fence, around the fence. They didn't build the storm pond to the requirements either. So there's a lot of failures there. So our main recommendations are really to do what you said you would do, and to follow your own laws would be really nice. But coming to it, the develop and implement improved policy, accountability, and in the enforcement measures so that we can have policies that are environmentally sufficient. And we would like to see this happen for all infrastructure projects, not just pertaining to Alberta Transportation, who in their vision statement state that they're right on top of environmental vitality. And so when we see what we saw, we're quite concerned because they knew that we were watching and taking note. So I can't imagine what's going on in other provincial infrastructure projects. It's probably pretty scary. We would like to see the province update the erosion and sediment control manual. So this was written in 2011. And we feel that since then, with climate change, you guys have all experienced, the water comes down just heavier, there's more of it in a shorter period of time. And I don't think that the current manual can addresses that, because we didn't have that issue when it was written. And so if we can rewrite it and come up with some new policies, not we as in the society, but the experts can rewrite it, come up with policies so that we can avoid things like what you see in the images there from happening. We would also like to see that because the Weaselhead is identified as a key wildlife and biodiversity zone. But when we talk about having noise walls for the sound mitigation, it's not included because there's no human residents down there. They always say there's no residents down there. I'm like, there's like 45 mammals that live there, like different species. But we would like to see that explored more, to change the policy so that a sound wall could be explored as an option being put up. We would like that underpass, the corridor, to have some more vegetation planted, because the vision that's stated in the EIA is that it's to provide rest and cover habitat, and a little bush of black henbane doesn't do that. So we would like to see a little bit more in there. And also we would like to see the wildlife fencing come up to what they had agreed on in their contracts. So because the wildlife fencing has all these holes and gaps, there's a lot of animals getting hit on the highway. So this is the Alberta wildlife collision data. And I just have, to give you an idea in this image here, the purple dots are coyotes, the bright green dots are mule deer, orange dots are a known species of deer, turquoise, white-tailed deer, domestic dog was hit on the road, the dark blue is owl, yellow is rabbits and hares, brown is raccoon, and ravens, crow, and magpie were also hit on the highway. So this image here gives you an idea of how many animals were hit annually. And I'll just point out here, right at that area is a 3-foot gap right in the middle of the fence. So obviously it's not directing the wildlife to the corridor, but you can see that the fencing is still kind of effective, because if you look where the fencing ends, where the car dealership is where the fencing ends. And right above that, there's a lot more collisions that are taking place. So it's somewhat still effective even with all the holes, but if they could fill those holes and build it to the way that they were legally agreed to do, I think that we could reduce a lot of these wildlife collisions. And I invite you guys, now that there's snow on the ground, when you're driving down that road, if you're a passenger, have a look and you can see exactly where the holes are, because there's going to be trails, there's trails in the snow coming straight from them. So the coyotes can just scoot underneath and the deer can just go through the 3-foot gaps, and it's wild and crazy. And this was their specifications in that design, build, finance, and operate agreement. And they were also instructed to have a mesh that went down to the ground and underneath so that wildlife couldn't dig under. But in these legal specifications, it was supposed to be a 75 millimeter gap. But we have spots where it's up to 254 millimeter gap underneath the bottom of the fence. So not really doing their job. I've been building wildlife fence because I work as a wildlife rehabber too for almost 30 years now. And if I left a 3-foot hole in a bear enclosure, I'd get in trouble. But nobody got in trouble here. But something to celebrate though is they have now included the escape routes. So you might have noticed that around Fish Creek, they first put it up and now they're around the Weasel Head. So this was supposed to be done before the road was opened. And they had failed to do that, but they've now come around and done it. So there is some spots you'll see where the wildlife can, if they're stuck in the road transportation utility corridor, they can get up and get back into the parks. During the time of construction, wildlife was struggling. They were not using the corridor. We had no data of them using the corridor that was intended for them. Perhaps they were going over the construction road, but we also had incidences where the city was having to put up bear traps in all the neighborhoods because I think they were just too scared to go west and they were starting to go east. And so we would like to see the province work with professionals to develop some mitigation tools that will be more effective for wildlife movement during construction. Because it wasn't very friendly for all the animals during this period of time. The storm pond was designed not to their specifications either. So this is the south and the north storm ponds. And they weren't supposed to have any straight lines that exceeded 50 meters in length. So it was supposed to be designed with curves in the shoreline. And you can measure on Google Earth that there's some straight lines here that are 270 meters in length. They could just go for a short walk over to the City of Calgary's storm pond in North Glenmore Park and have a look at a good storm pond, because this one provides wildlife habitat. There's a lot of birds and songbirds around there. The storm pond for the ring road was supposed to be fully vegetated. You can clearly see it's not, and you can see it for yourself as you drive by. So we hope that things can be improved there. I know they might not be able to like redesign the whole thing, but at least plant some plants that you said you'd plant would be nice. The province of Alberta has a Weed Act. So it's a legal agreement. The City of Calgary has to follow it. If they're not getting rid of their noxious weeds, they get in trouble. But for some odd reason, the ring road doesn't count. I don't know, it does count though. There's a lot of invasive plants that we're finding along that edge, and it is a problem. So the middle picture there is spotted knapweed. It was introduced, we first started noticing it in the park in 2016. So before the ring road was being built. And we have had some success. We have a lot of volunteers that go out and pull it out, and we're seeing a decline in it. But one little plant has up to 40,000 seeds. So when they don't pick their plants on their side, it's really impacting us on our side. Henbane was not in the City of Calgary before the ring road was put in, and we removed 1,026 pounds in one day from the Weasel Head side, and could see a whole bunch of it on their side. So they really need to start following their own Weed Act, would be great. And we would like to see a continue evaluation of that changing hydrological regime, see what's going on with the groundwater. Piezometers could be installed to have a better understanding, because we do want to understand, did the did the beaver pond dry up because of that change in the hydrological regime and that compaction of the groundwater system? We would like to have these answers, but I know that they do too. So that's why they had that third party monitoring some of that. We also want to see some continued long-term monitoring of the bird species. Our methodologies, we were just, as I said, we're copying what was done in the EIA, but we recognize there's a lot of data gaps. So we just were doing one survey at the end of June, and we want to find out more data about nighttime use, nocturnal birds that are in the area, overwintering birds. And so we have, for the Weaselhead Society, we have applied for a grant, and hopefully we can be awarded it and we can continue some of that. With the society, everything is funding based. We can't make promises that we can do it, but we recommend that somebody continue looking at it. And we would like to see some additional practices explored to see how we can get the construction companies to comply with what they've agreed to do. So there is enforcement, which is great, but it's Ellis Don was fined $5,000 for removing bluebird boxes during the Southwest Calgary Ring Road construction, and then they went and did it again when they were doing the West Ring Road. They got fined $100,000 the second time though, so hopefully it's going to smarten them up. I can't even believe that the bluebirds themselves didn't smarten them up, because I know that those guys would have been getting dive bombed as they're throwing the active nest down on the ground. KGL was fined $11,000 when they released, for $5,000 for clearing vegetation around the storm palms during nesting season. These are things that you're not supposed to do. Hopefully those fines are making them think more, but I think $5,000 is like a dime in their pocket. $11,000 was fined to KGL when they released water from the construction site into Fish Creek that was quite dirty water, because they had failed to implement the siltation and erosion control plan at that time. They were also fined another $7,500 when they allowed sediment laden waters to enter into the beaver pond. So efforts are made, there's fines are being done, but it's not stopping the bad behavior. So we just want to have the province explore how can they do better at making sure that these companies that they're contracting are meeting the obligations that they've agreed to do, and that they can ensure that environmental vitality that they have in their vision. For next steps, we've got we're working with the City of Calgary and their habitat management plan. We want to start implementing a lot more citizen science. So in both working with the habitat management plan, but also continuing for long-term monitoring that replicates what we've done with our impact study. So going to the same survey sites and doing more bird monitoring, going to the vegetation transect that we had and continuing to monitor that. And then hopefully the big next step is that there's improved policy that's going to ensure that these mitigation measures are implemented. And that would be so wonderful, because when technical requirements are not being met, then the consequence is the decreased water quality, loss of biodiversity, ecosystem services that we all depend on are damaged. And so we just need to do better.